Welcome to the nextTalk podcast, where we share real stories and practical advice for parenting the digital world.
We're your hosts, Mandy and Kim. Mandy is an award-winning author and the founder of nextTalk, and I'm the director of nextTalk, a nonprofit organization created to strengthen families through open communication. You can check out all of our resources at nexttalk.org.
We're wives, moms, and friends, tackling culturally relevant topics from a Christian perspective. We're sharing what we've learned and where we've failed. We're so glad you're here for this conversation.
So it's me, Kim, today, and Mandy's not here, but in her place is our incredible Jamie Mershon. She's an MA LPC. She serves on our advisory council, and she is our amazing counselor that's a part of our counseling program. And I have to tell you, since the day that we have met her, she has changed lives, not only for us, but those that we send her way. An ongoing theme that we hear is, I didn't know there were counselors like that in the world. And so, Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's always a treat. I get excited. As much as I love being in the counselor chair, this is a fun way to mix it up. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Jamie, even though she helps us and partners with us, she's also a mom. She has 3 little girls and a wife to her sweet husband. And she's a busy lady. I mean, she does a lot. She's skilled in trauma therapy and ETT, which is emotional transformation therapy. And she's often booked out for a while because she's so good at what she does. And so that was kind of the foundation of why we wanted to do this show. Is we get contacted all the time by families who are struggling through something, or they realize that there's a need beyond what they can address. And so they want counseling. And there's not a lot of great counselors out there, especially if you're looking for a Christian counselor. It's hard to find. Let's just be honest. And so here, Mandy and I were sitting over here, taking all these calls and talking through these things and thinking, once people are able to get a counseling appointment, in the meantime, what do they do? Are there things that we can suggest or encourage parents to consider while they're waiting for counseling? And so that's why we wanted to have you on today.
Yeah. And I think that's such a worthy and important topic to address, because you're right. And especially when you're working with teens, they often find themselves in crisis mode. And when they're in crisis, they want to go right now. And so that's what's so hard is in the waiting. Sometimes a crisis, can figure itself out, or they can lose hope, or they can just get to a really dark place and they come up with their own solutions. And oftentimes those solutions can be very dangerous and very dark. And so that is the first question we want to just kind of assess with our child is how dark and how dangerous is their place of crisis? Are we talking about self-harm? Are we talking about suicide? And if that is the situation, 911, emergency room, or a crisis facility is always going to be our first route. But if they are not in that place, then the next question is, and I've said this before, is oftentimes they don't want to go away, but they want a problem or a feeling to go away. So what is the problem you want to go away, or what is the feeling that they want to go away? And sometimes they may not even be able to tell you the feeling, because they may not even have the words to put to it. And so if you just Google or even go on Amazon and put feelings wheel, that is a great tool for parents. And what I like about that is when we think about feelings, we often think of just sad, mad, happy, just kind of like generic feelings. And what I like about the feelings wheel is it takes it deeper. So it might take sadness and it takes it to disappointment, and disappointment to shame. And so maybe somebody would initially say shame, but when you go from sad to disappointment to shame, you kind of trace it. Well, how do we go from sad to shame? And you can talk through it. So I think that's always a great tool. And then allow them to feel okay just to sit with it and not judge it. Feelings aren't good or bad, they're needed. So essentially what I tell kids is like, if somebody hits your dog with their car, what feeling is needed? Sadness and mad, right? God created us where we need feelings, and no other feeling would make sense in that situation. So, if your friends are spreading rumors about you or they posted, an inappropriate picture, it is good and right to feel mad. It is good and right to feel shame because they just exposed something about you. That's an appropriate feeling that you need to feel, and you need to sit with that feeling. Now, it's not fun and it's not comfortable, but it would make sense to sit with it.
That's so good. So I love how you kind of did that in steps. That first question is assessing, is it dangerous or is it a struggle, and kind of making that delineation so you know what kind of help to get your kid. And then moving into the feelings, like what's going on, and then addressing those feelings, and normalizing them. That's so healthy, because I think a lot of times, I know with my kids, there have been times where they're struggling with something and they don't know the word for the feeling. Like you said,
Right.
they don't know how to express that. They just know that they
Right.
feel something. And
Right.
giving our kids words sometimes is so powerful, just for them to be able to name it and normalize it. Like, it's okay that you feel that way.
Exactly. And just even asking them, like, where do you feel it in your body? Do you feel it in your chest? Do you feel it in your legs? So lots of times things between your head and your heart, it's grief. So maybe there's something that they lost, or if it's in your legs, it you feel stuck. And if it's in your hips and lower back, it can often mean just we're struggling with boundaries. And so maybe they feel like, they're stuck in a situation where they're people pleasing, or they feel like, they're just always bending to what everyone else needs. And so those are really good questions to ask. Where do you feel it in your body? And then just even equipping them on just a breathing technique. And so a very simple one is just 1-4-2. And so it's just breathe in for 1, hold for 4, and breathe out for 2. And that's just a really great way to get oxygen and just kind of reset you. And so sometimes kids, they don't want to talk about it, and that's okay. But just giving them that really simple tool of just, hey, 1-4-2, put that in their planner for school, put it on their phone, just a reminder, hey, buddy, hey, sweetie, just breathe 1-4-2, and just giving them that tool of just knowing if you don't want to talk about it, breathe it out.
I love that. That's just real practical. You could even text that to your kid, hey, struggling today, 1-4-2, remember.
Yeah.
So you said something that reminded me that sometimes they don't want to talk. So let's say, your kid's struggling and you've got this counseling appointment, it's a couple months out, and you think, okay, I'm going to go in there and, crawl into bed with them, and they just don't want to talk, or you're in the car. Do you have any ideas on how to get them to open up a little bit, that are simple, that mom or dad could do?
Yeah, I think that is such a great question. And I think one of the things is sometimes, it's understanding how your kid may process. So some of them may be a verbal processor. So they don't need you to fix anything. They just need you to listen. So you can even just ask that question. Do you just need me to listen, or do you need feedback? Or, hey, is there a song that really speaks to how you're feeling right now? Do you want to just listen to it together? And so I always say, when your kids are even going through something, sometimes just like, hey, if there's a playlist, let's make a playlist. A lot of times kids will process things through music, or do you want to draw this out, process it through creativity, or even asking just, we can have a journal of writing back and forth. If you don't want to talk about it, we can write things, like you can write to me, I can write back to you, and I think the biggest thing is, you don't have to tell me everything you're going through, but you need to know that you don't have to go through it alone. And if you're not ready to talk to me, I need you to know, though, it's not your job to carry this alone, and not to let yourself get in a dark place where you feel like you have to carry this alone. And so if you just need to come into bed with me, or you just text me a certain emoji, it just means that you're just not in a safe place, and you don't trust yourself with your feelings and thoughts, and you're scared with how you're feeling. We don't even have to talk. If you just need to come into bed with me, or we just need to watch a movie, sometimes kids they don't even, like I said earlier, they don't have the words to it, but they just need your presence, or they just don't want to be alone. Or, mom, you had that dinner tonight that you and dad were going to go to. Can you just stay home tonight?
Yes. That, you know what? I'm so glad you said that, because one of the things we run into with parents a lot when we're talking to them about these hard conversations is they'll say, I didn't know I needed to say that. Of course they know I'm here for them. Of course they know I love them. Or if they need to talk to me, that I'm here. And I just, I want to encourage parents to hear what Jamie's saying. You have to say it. You have to say it not just once. It's an ongoing conversation. It's a saying it in different ways, and finding that way to continually remind your kid, I'm on your team. I'm with you in this. You don't have to be alone. And that's just such a powerful tool that we forget sometimes because we think they know.
Yeah. And two, it can also be, a thing like, what are things that we need to maybe take a break from right now? So there might be things in their lives, like, there's certain music that might be more dark, or they're following certain people on social media. And it's like, you're really struggling with this, and they're talking a lot about dark stuff. Or I noticed that, they're talking a lot about things that don't really have a lot of hope in them. Or you're listening to a lot of music that talks about dying. Sometimes we can connect to that if we're grieving, or if, we're going through something hard. But then there's other times where it feeds into a narrative, or it makes us feel more depressed. And so maybe even just kind of doing an inventory of what your child is inputting into their brain at that time. Like, what are you reading? What are you, because when kids are going through something hard, they're avoiding and escaping through something. What they're reading, what they're seeing, what they're listening to, what they're watching. And so it might just kind of be doing an inventory too of, what are you inputting right now? What is helping and what is hurting, or what is kind of weighing you down even more?
So, we're always saying that as you're parenting a cell phone or their devices or their tablet, it's really important to do those random checks. And it's not just to find pornography or just to find a toxic text message. It's also to kind of get a sense of what your kid is putting into their psyche and their heart and their mind. And I mean, I will crack up sometimes when I'm doing a random phone check, because I'm like, okay, so this is the space my kid is in. That makes sense. And so it's really like a parenting tip too. Even if your kid's in a healthy space, like get a sense of where their head is at by seeing what they're putting into their mind. And then also when they are struggling, like you said, it can give you, some information on how to talk to them, about creating some boundaries there. I think that's so great. Like taking a break from the toxic stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And just using that word right now, because they're looking for a sense of control because something feels out of control. Yeah. So just saying, hey, we're going to take a break from some things right now,
It's good. Yes.
So just that kind of makes them kind of feel a little more disarmed. You're not saying forever. You're not saying like, I'm taking this away. Hey, let's just take a break from some of things right now. Or, let's go for a walk and talk. And sometimes that's good too, because kids just feel that eye to eye can be really hard. When they're struggling with something, they might feel exposed, or they don't know how to put the words to it. So even just saying, taking a break from something right now, you're like, okay, well, what do we fill our time with? And so maybe that looks like we're going to go for a walk, or we're going to add some movement. And movement is so great. And I think what is good about that is because it's like that parallel, it's not eye to eye. Kids are so used to, looking down. Yeah. That eye contact can be really intimidating sometimes. And so just movement pairing with either we're just not going to talk, we're just going to go for a walk, or maybe a walk and talk, and it doesn't have to be anything over the top. I think too, for parents, it's just more than anything, we would love just our child to open up, and we would love to almost be their therapist and for it to be this intimate thing, but to also just keep our expectations just realistic. If it's like, if all we do is walk and we got them out of the house and got fresh air, that's a win, right? I mean, even as a therapist, I feel that same way. If they got on the couch and they shared one song with me, it's a win. Right? Naturally, some kids are like, I couldn't wait to come to therapy, and they open up. And some kids, that's just not their style, and that's okay. And so it's just knowing your kid, having realistic expectations, and just knowing where the wins are and not pressuring them or having an unrealistic expectation.
It's funny because you shifted naturally into what I was going to ask you next, which is, I think sometimes as parents, when we know our kids are struggling, we can kind of go into panic mode because we don't know what's happening or we're afraid of where they're thinking or what they might do. What are some things that maybe can be not helpful as we're waiting for that counseling appointment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that I say is keep it the right size. So sometimes when things are going on, we can catastrophize and we can take, something that's like an apple and turn it into a watermelon. And
Yes.
we can take something that's an apple and we can minimize it and make it a grape. And so this kind of almost is insightful for how we deal things in our personal lives as a parent. So maybe we're so overwhelmed by the situation where we're like, oh, it's not that bad. So we want to take something and we want to make it smaller because that makes us feel better because it's like we're freaking out. So we minimize it. And it's like, it's fine. Kids are going through stuff after the pandemic and we minimize it and we don't see how serious it is. And then sometimes we, are so nervous and so panicked. We take an apple and we turn it into a watermelon and we're like, oh my word, they're going to kill themselves and I haven't slept and I haven't ate and I've called 4 different places to get them admitted. And
Yes.
like, Mom, all I said was, I just feel sad sometimes. They don't have a plan, nothing like that. So I think that what I mean is keep it the right size. And so if it is a watermelon, let's act accordingly, right? If it is an apple, let's act accordingly. And if it's a grape, let's act accordingly. So I think it's just really meeting the child where they're at. And it's really just letting them know that we have them because they're freaking out and you may be freaking out and that's fair. And right. And that's where you call your people or your pastor or
Yes.
your spouse or your friends, but doing your best even to do the 1, 4, 2 as you're walking them through that and just saying, you know what, this is really hard, but we're going to get through this. I'm going to make some phone calls or just stop and say, hey, let's pray about this.
Mm-hmm.
Let's come up with a plan and let's see if we need to make some phone calls or let's see who we need to get involved in this to make sure you're safe or we get you the proper help while we're waiting for counseling. And so I think just knowing that you have a plan and just knowing that the child sees, okay, my parent knows how to handle this. My parent is equipped on navigating this.
Yeah, that's such great advice. And, that parent filter, we talk about that all the time too, when your kids bring you something crazy. And so it's that same thing, hearing them out and not losing your mind. Because I think too, sometimes kids like match our emotion. If
Right.
I'm freaking out, then they're like, oh, maybe I should be freaking out too.
Right.
And so goes back to your point number one of really assessing where your kid is at. And that means listening to them.
Right.
Knowing your kid, hearing what's really going on. If they are just saying, sometimes I'm sad, it's okay for them to sometimes be sad. We don't have to make it a watermelon.
Right, exactly. And letting them know, like, yeah, that normalizing that because they're going to feel that feeling again and getting them comfortable with, if your friend didn't want to sit with you at lunch, yeah, I would be sad too. And just that's a very normal thing that kids go through. And it makes sense that you're sad. It's probably best that you just sit with that for a little bit. You want me to sit next to you? Or how can I help you work through that? But just letting them know that they're going to be okay. But that is a normal feeling to feel. And so sometimes we go in to fix it and we're uncomfortable that they're sad or we feel bad that they're sad. But they have to get comfortable with feeling a natural feeling that fits the situation. So we want to be careful too that we don't go into fix it mode, that we organically just help them navigate what they're feeling and kind of, I always call it a wave, but like a wave comes in and it goes back out. So how do we sit with the wave? How do we normalize the wave? And then, okay, wow, how exactly did you do that? How did you allow yourself to be sad? And you worked through that. And now you're laughing at dinner. It's kind of good to ask them, like, how did you do that? And that's good for them to reflect on how did they move from sadness to, oh, now I'm in a better place.
And what a great tool to learn as a kid how to navigate life, essentially. I mean, this is what you're saying, because that's just a part of life. Sad, mad, all those emotions you
Yes.
named earlier, that's not ever going away. And
No.
we're so used to numbing with Netflix, games on our phone,
Yes.
videos, whatever it is, substances, that to be able to sit with something and learn how to do that at a young age and learn a healthy coping mechanism, what
Right.
a gift to your kid.
Absolutely. And that's something that I think, a lot of parents are not coming in with. They did not learn that. I
Yes.
didn't learn that.
Yes.
So feelings can make them uncomfortable or they don't feel equipped. So it's something you can learn together, and it's even as your child is learning to be comfortable with sitting in their sadness, you're learning to be comfortable with seeing your child hurt and not feeling that you need to rescue or fix,
Ah,
because your child being sad or your child being wounded or your child being rejected, that's part of growing up.
yeah.
And we want to rescue and fix, but then your child doesn't know how to sit with those uncomfortable feelings. And so as they're learning, we can be learning too.
I love that. And I feel that. Like I mean, I notice my own patterns, I like to
Hey,
fix or
yes,
numb with food. And that was
yes,
my coping mechanism. And I realized I was passing that on to my kids, even celebrating, with
right.
something good happens, ice cream,
Yes,
cake, cupcake. We feel sad, ice cream, cupcake. Like, it's so true. We can learn with our kids, and not to
yes,
shame ourselves for the fact that we don't have all the answers. We
right.
are still learning, and it's okay. It's okay to develop these skills later in life. The fact is, if we're trying, I think that's what really counts.
Yes, I agree. And it's just that growth mindset. And, it's feelings are needed. And I think it's recognizing when feelings become authoritative. And that's not good when we're being controlled by them. But, when we do see, okay, Lord, you did create me with feelings, and I need to honor that, I've been sinned against or I've been hurt and I'm worthy to feel that hurt. And
Yeah.
then there's times where it's like, okay, I am not trusting God with this, and I am being ruled by my emotions. And it's been 2 days and I am still just, bitter at this person. And I am angry and I am cussing, and, that's a different conversation. And so I think it's figuring out, how do I honor myself, and I am worthy to feel, but how do I honor God with my feelings?
So good. Always, Jamie. Is there anything else, as parents are waiting for some help, with their kids, anything else that you want to encourage our moms and dads with?
Yeah, I think the other thing too is just practical things, right? Like tech time, what are they eating? How is their sleep? Sometimes just a lot of practical things that we can be doing that can just be super helpful, and your child may fight you on it, but once they get in a better sleeping pattern, or they're eating, more healthy or just more consistently, or just maybe even spending more time as a family and stuff like that. Those are just practical things that I think that are always helpful, because they just feel just overall better health. And so we sometimes can forget those things, and we put so much stock in a therapist, and like, oh my word, like they're the ones that are going to fix it. But it's like, we have a God who cares more than a therapist, more than you, and loves your child so dearly, and just the power of prayer and all the practical things that we can do. But then also that discernment as a parent of just praying over your child and just really leaning in, and just that Holy Spirit of just prompting conversations too.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned those practical things, because they do sort of go by the wayside sometimes when we get all caught up in the emotion. I had a kid that was struggling with something, and so much of it was fixed by adjusting his food for blood sugar drops. We just didn't
Yeah.
realize he was so sensitive to that. And it was like, oh, you're back, And so it's true. Sometimes it can be a simple thing. And I love that you added on that at the end of the day, the Holy Spirit is going to guide us in our conversation. God gave us these kids. He will equip us. And it's just so imperative that we're leaning into that and trusting that God can give us answers. As far as counseling goes, being able to know when your kid needs a counselor is so important. And even though we're having to wait a long time because there is a lack of really good counselors, these tips are gold. Jamie, gold, just a great way to support our kids in the waiting, which sometimes feels so desperate and lonely and scary, but you've made it feel accessible. You've made it feel doable. And so thank you for spending the time to share with us today.
Of course. I'm so happy that I was able to join you today, Kim.
Thank you so much for joining us, listening, and sharing our podcast. Because of you, this show is in the top 5% of over 2.9 million podcasts.
We have lots of resources for you, from counseling to live events. Or if you have a show idea or a question for our team, visit our website at nextTalk.org. We'd love to hear from you.
At nextTalk, we're more than cyberparenting. It's conversations to connect.
This podcast is not intended to replace the advice of a trained healthcare or legal professional or to diagnose, treat, or otherwise render expert advice regarding any type of medical, psychological, or legal problem. Listeners are advised to consult a qualified expert for treatment.